barely scratches the surface of what really it is. This will serve, I think, much more as an introduction than anything else, because you'll notice that when we're talking about this, there's so many interesting things about particular plants that you can't even cover everything about one plant at a time. As an example, I did a whole presentation, an hour-long presentation, all on the ethnobotany and the history of milkweeds. And again, that's just one plant. And you could basically, we could talk about all these plants in a variety of different ways. So all you're going to see here is just a little taste of the much broader field of ethnobotany. Okay, so I know I'm missing stuff. I know there's lots of things that won't be covered or anything like that. So this is just a taste into you learning about a lot more than that. I've done some ethnobotany classes on much bigger time, and usually, you know, it's a 3-hour-long thing very easily. So I'm happy to be able to at least do this and have you have a taste of what's a very, very cool field, and to share again some stories. Some of them will be personal stories, some is from personal experience, some will be things that I've read from other people, and hopefully between them we'll have a chance to do this. So folks, again, flora, folklore, and ethnobotany. And again, a quick little change about this. But before I do that, some stuff, shameless self-promotion. You guys have not been part of my Capital Naturalist group. I invite you to do so. It won the National NEI Interpretive Naturalist section Award of Excellence. And so I share it with you guys. 4 different ways you can follow, either on my blog spot, you can do it in a Facebook group, follow me on Twitter, or you can check out the YouTube channel. So a lot of different things here. But going back to our regular programming, a chance to look about flora, folklore, and ethnobotany. So before I continue too much, I should explain what we're talking about. So ethnobotany. So one of the ways to kind of define it is the study of how people use locally occurring plants, the science of people's interactions with plants. Of course, this goes back for a long, long time, but the term ethnobotany was first coined, as you can see, in 1895, and it's been used since then. But of course, people have been using plants there, you know, since there were any people. I think this is a little bit different because it's not just that you're eating the plants, but also other different ways that you use them for, and that's really what ethnobotany kind of became. As an example, a 60,000-year-old Neanderthal burial ground had all sorts of plants that were laid out in a very ceremonial way in the actual gravesite. And this includes stuff that people still use today, things such as marshmallow, ground cells, and yarrow. And these, again, were plants that weren't necessarily things that you eat right away or anything like that. They were placed there because of another significance to the people. And so that is, you know, it just goes to show you how far back this stuff goes. And I think it's kind of a neat thing. And again, a different way to look at, I guess, at plants. So one of the plants that was mentioned in there is yarrow. And yarrow just goes to show you some of the ways that this stuff has happened. Yarrow is basically found in Europe. It's found in North America. It's found in Northern Africa. It's all over the place. Some places in Asia. So yarrow has been used by tons of different people in a variety of different ways. The most popular way that it was used had to do with a very interesting with yarrow. So our yarrow, if you were to pull it, even smells very herbally. I mean, there's something very special about medicine when you yank any of it. So Achillea milliifolia, it's named after Achilles, and the reason it's named after Achilles is most people don't know this, but Achilles was said to have studied under a great scholar, a medicine man called Chiron, and he shared with him all these secrets of how to basically use plants for healing. And so, believe it or not, Achilles, even though he's known as as a hero in Greek myth, but in reality, he was the patron of battle medicine. And it said that Achilles, him and his soldiers, what they called the myrmidons, everywhere they went, they would carry yarrow with them. And again, yarrow goes back for a long, long time. Herbal militaris was another name for it. It's called nosebleed plant because even to this day, people will sometimes put it on their nose and it helps them to stop bleeding. Old man's pepper because it's also edible. Tastes tastes a little bit funny, but that is, it is something that's used for seasoning, as it were. Sanguinaria, again, refers to the blood. Milfoil, it's got 1,000 leaves. That's what millifolia means. And you can see the leaves are deeply divided, so that's why it's got milfoil. Soldier's woundwort, that was something that was named during the Civil War. 1,000 leaves, you can see all of these. And again, they're all very important. And most of them have to do with the way that this was really good at stopping bleeding, woundwort. And so yarrow was used all over the place in all these different continents as a medicinal plant, especially to be able to stop bleeding. And I think it's kind of interesting if you think about them, that all these different cultures, some of them separated by oceans, found very similar ways to use the same plant. And again, you can discuss why people find this out. Was it an accident? How do people know when something is useful for something? But this is an example of just such a thing, which covers, such a long parts of the world and with a lot of different people using it. So yarrow is just one example of a way that people use a plant in a very unusual way, and that so many different cultures picked it up on their own. Now, if you really wanted to study ethnobotany, the absolute best book for this is the Native American Ethnobotany, put together by Daniel Mormon. This was an incredible book. It's very big. This thing is not a field guide. This thing is very heavy, but in there, you see Daniel Mormon. He spent over 25 years researching all the different tribes. He actually found that of the 3,923 different vascular plants that he listed in there, he found 4,691 different ways that they were used by 291 different societies, in this case, mostly tribes. Again, when you look at it, it's not easy reading. It's all spelled out in it's all with the scientific name for the plants, but under it, there's just a quick description. I'll say drug and by which tribes used it and things like that. So it's not something you can use to find out how to use these plants in different ways, but an excellent thing to find out some of the ways that people may have found to use these plants. And so this is basically the Bible for people in North America who wanted to learn about ethnobotany. So Daniel Mormon's, this is the best book on the whole subject. So again, in the book, you can find out that they divide them in a bunch of different ways. When he first started doing it, in reality, Mormon was not looking for all these different ways. He wanted to see how people fed on, use these things for food. And then later on, he found out that with so many things that were used for food, they were used for other things. And so he collected them. So in his book, you find out that as far as food uses, 1,886 different ones, different species were used and recorded by using different tribes in over 11,000 different ways. If you look at tools, and this includes dyes, cordage, fibers, all other things like that, again, this is not what he was trying to find in the first place, but he found that many of these things were used for that as well. And of course, medicine, tons of these, and this included not just medicine for people, but medicine for animals. And he found that again, you're looking at something that over, almost 25,000 different ways that they were used. So this is very simple kind of way to look at it, as food, as tools, medicine. In reality, most of these plants are used in a variety of different ways, but this is sort of one interesting way to divide things up by what they were used for. Now, here you see a chart of some of the stuff that he put together, and you start noticing that many of these plants, in fact, 55 different plants that he recorded, were used in a variety of different things. So for example, if you look at the first one here, Western red cedar, where it grew, it was used not only as a drug, but as food, as a fiber, as a dye, and from other uses as well. And so again, these are some big, long lists of plants and whatever, but the whole point is that you can talk about, this plant was used as a food, this plant was used as a medicine. In reality, most of the plants were used in a variety of different ways, and it's hard to categorize just one thing or another. Just something to keep in mind. Most plants have multiple uses that people found of them. One such thing is this one. So this is cattail, and broadleaf cattail grows, of course, in many of our places, and a lot of people sometimes call it it's the wetland pharmacy, as it were. These things are used in a variety of different ways year-round by almost every tribe where this was near them. And I mean, as an example, you could actually take the actual flowers of these things, and believe it or not, you can cook them up and eat them almost like corn. The flower itself was used, so you can see my cursor, but the flower itself was used as a filler with flour and things like that, and eaten that way. The actual fibers were used for things such as lining things, in particular things like papooses or whatever you carried your babies in. It was edible too in the early spring if you dig down at the bottom of the plant and get the plant, the part that's blanched off, the little piece that's buried in the soil, wash it off. It tastes exactly like cucumber. And of course, the reeds themselves, this is great for matting material for making all sorts of different kinds of things. And the tubers, you can eat them. They're dried, so even in wintertime, people could eat the tubers too on the bottom, or I should say the rhizomes, not really tubers, but the long roots as well. So this plant, in a variety of different ways, was useful for people, and and people have maybe forgotten some of it, but it is an incredibly useful plant. And you could, and since it's a very common plant, one that was used by a variety of different people. I'll stop right there for a second. Are there any questions about anything that I've explained so far before we continue on?
We have Karen that says, is marshmallow really a plant?
Mm-hmm. So the original marshmallow, and again, I didn't mean to go off on these tangents, but you can do this with all these plants. The original marshmallow is different from the marshmallows that we have here. But if you go with the European one, you could actually break down and get some of the gelatinous parts of it, and those were the original marshmallows. Now, I don't believe that you can do that with any of the marshmallows that we have here in our neck of the woods. Okay, we have 2 or 3 of them around here, but the name marshmallow has stuck into this, and that is where the original marshmallows came from. This being used, the gelatinous parts of it being used to cook up what is now part of almost every kind of campfire. So yes, marshmallows, there really are marshmallows, and the European ones were edible. Ours, I've never heard of them actually being eaten, right?
Alex Rolf asks, it's just a flower here, right? The taste is the same and is used in tea? Used in tea?
So which plant are you talking about? Back to marshmallows?
Marshmallows, yes.
Yes, no. So marshmallows, again, the original part I think was actually, the marshmallow part that we originally used in Europe was actually the roots. I think you could smash them up, they'd be very gelatinous, and that's what they made marshmallows out of. Ours over here are not used that way. They're beautiful plants, they're gigantic. They provide a ton of food. Good luck finding a marshmallow plant out in the wetlands is not totally eaten up by all sorts of things like beetles. So it's a very useful plant, but again, ours are much more used by wildlife than by people. It's the European one that gave us the name marshmallows.
Thank you. That is one more question from Igorette. Mallow from Europe are different species than our hibiscus mallow?
Yes, a completely different species, same genus. It's in the marshmallow family, the hibiscus family. And in the hibiscus family, you have different species. Around here, we have a couple of them. Chrysamide marshmallow, halberd leaf marshmallow, but the European one is a different species in the same family.
Awesome. That is all for now.
All right. Well, let's continue on our little mission here. And let me explain another concept. And that's the doctrine of signatures. And again, even though this was it's a universal idea popularized by Paracelsus, and even though we usually think of it as basically a Catholic type of thing, or I should say something that has to do with Catholicism or something like that, in reality, it's spread out in a lot of different ways. A lot of different cultures had the same idea, and that is that some higher power, God, whatever you want to call him, had plants put on the earth, and he marked them with what's called a signature to show that their healing value. Okay, there's a great story about this the Cherokee have too, but it's the same idea. The Cherokee have their version, and in this case, the doctrine of signatures was popular in Europe and then transferred over here. So how does this kind of work? Well, you look for the sign. So if you look at a black walnut and you cut it open, you find out that supposedly this would be good brain food, because guess what? The meat looks like brains and the shell is hard like a skull. So thus, the sign would tell you that it actually was a brain type of food. And again, you'd have to really look at a few of these. Some of these things are not easy to come up with. But again, people really believe this. If you looked at a plant and you knew what you were looking for, there would be a sign on there to tell you what it was good for. One such example is roundleaf hepatica, what's called liverwort. Liverwort because, again, as you can tell, the actual leaves of the hepatic itself, the liverwort, some people thought looks like a liver. And because of that, obviously, it was used for problems having to do with the liver. Again, you have to really imagine these things, but this is kind of how that kind of goes. Same thing with this. we have a bunch of these little bellworts, okay, Mary bells and whatever. So this particular one, you know, this is portfolio bellwort because you can see the flower cuts in the middle of the plant. This is portfolio bellwort. Scientific name of the bellwort's uvularia. And why is it called uvularia? Because to someone's imagination, this little flower looks like the uvula, whatever that hangs in the back of your throat, and thus obviously was good for throats. So that's how the doctrine of signatures comes into effect. So again, you have to really look at these in different ways, and sometimes big stretches of imagination. But the doctrine of signatures was a very popular way of people finding out what these plants were good for, or what they assumed that they were good for by looking for whatever sign was on them. And that's a little bit about the doctrine of signatures. Well, I'll continue one more, and if we need to, we'll come back and talk about this. So they always say, you know, when people are in real big trouble, that's when you really start looking for solutions. Okay, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and that was the case in a variety of different ways. One of my favorite ones has to do with this. What's a long title is, you know, Southern Fields and Forests, whatever. Most people call it the medical botany of the Confederate States. The way this happened was that a doctor, Dr. Francis Porcher, he was basically given the assignment that once the South, the Confederacy, had been blockaded and couldn't get in and out of ports, to find different ways of plants and so forth they could use that were homegrown, as it were. And so he and a bunch of the other doctors that work with him put together this treatise. And it's kind of a neat thing because, again, they searched some things that have to do with Native Americans. Some of it was stuff that they learned, some was pressing type of stuff. But they came together with a really neat collection of wonderful ways that they found of using the plants around them to kind of cover for the things that were no longer available, that were blockaded and couldn't get through it. And again, if you were to find this, and you can find this, you can find it online. Okay, I can't remember where, but if you look this up online, you can look through it. And you have to remember the names used would be, you know, way back in 1860s. Okay, so the names are going to be slightly different. But I love going through here and finding all the neat ways that, by necessity, the South had to come up with new ways of dealing with of things that they could no longer buy anymore. Now, an interesting thing. One of the things which is covered the most in here, believe it or not, had to do with how to make something alcoholic to drink. That seemed to be like the most popular part of this whole thing. But again, I love watching through there, and I always compare it because I like to see what people came up with as ideas to use these kinds of things. So a neat little thing, you know, what's sometimes called the Confederate botany, but a neat little thing. Before I continue, any other questions? All right, good.
Alex is asking, has doctrine signatures?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hold on, something
The
else.
doctrine of signatures?
Has doctrine of signatures led to dead ends or plants that used to have harmful effects? I can only imagine must have led to mistakes.
A lot of them. There are so many things. And again, this is another thing. Whenever you think about it, and this is true, and I was going to discuss this when we cover medicinal types of plants, and that is sometimes what you really need is something that you think is going to work. And by you thinking, having a positive thought that this is going to work or something like that, that can sometimes be just as good as anything else in trying to cure you. I mean, there's a lot of examples of this kind of stuff. So some of the stuff was complete, you know, didn't work at all. Some people thought they worked. And if they really thought they worked, that was enough to make them feel as though it might work for them. And sometimes that was all they needed, was just this belief that it might work for them, and they could get healed that way. So again, it's not a true thing. The doctrine of signatures is what people thought happened, but they've tested a lot of these kinds of things, and in reality, most of them, there isn't a lot of great proof that this actually works. Okay, but that was the belief way back when. All right, so continuing on.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
One more.
Yeah.
Steve Lonker requests to comment on safety and efficacy issues connected with the use of herbal medicines, like low concentrations, paucity of information, composition of extracts, and interactions with each other, varying effects from person to person.
Absolutely. again, I was going to cover this when I get to the medicinal portion of this, which I haven't gotten to, but here's the thing. Many people who are practicing herbalists, shamans, witch doctors, whatever we want to call them. And you got to remember, more than half the world still believes in these herbal uses of medicines, different kinds of ways that you can use them. But it takes a lot of study to know the exact amount. Plants differ by if it's a wet year versus a dry year, what time of year you collect it, what size of the plant. All of these kinds of things can affect the actual concentration of them. And then there's the different sizes of people. What is the correct dose of this person versus that person? Does it differ because this was collected in the rain, or is it different because it came from during a drought period? All of these affect the use of any of these kinds of herbalism. So if you ever do decide that you want to try some of these medicines and things like that, just remember that many people studied for a long, long time to become really good at using herbalism, okay? And so it is not something that, oh, I heard this is good for this, and then you try it. Like I'll mention a couple of plants. This is not something that you try right away. It takes a lot of practice, and it's something that you really need to learn from other people and learn the different ways of doing this. And that's true all across the world. People who still use herbalism and shamans, witch doctors, whatever you want to call them, many of them have studied for a long time to be accredited to be able to do these kinds of things. You cannot just say, oh, it was used for this, and then try it and think it's going to work for you. And sometimes it really won't work for you, make you even sicker. So that's something important. And we're going to get to that in a second, okay? We are going to get to that. One example of some of the stuff that came out includes a white walnut. This is a plant that's not disappearing. This is different from the black walnut. I actually was really, I put this in here because 2 days ago I found some white walnuts, some butternuts in one of the Arlington parks. And I'm really psyched because this is disappearing. There's a kind of a blight which is affecting them and actually killing all the plants. So it's very psyched to find one that was producing seeds. But this was one of the things that during the Civil War was used to make butternut, to dye things. Butternut units were pretty famous, mostly in the South, but some in the North, where they dye these things and you end up with a very effective dye, so that at least you had a uniform that would tell you which side you're on. And so, yeah, this is an example of something which is pointed out in the Confederate Ethnobotany I've just mentioned. So, going into medicines, which somebody just mentioned. So here are some medicinal plants. By the way, those that have the little asterisk next to them, those are the local plants, okay? The other ones are not local. But then these are across the whole United States. These are medicinal plants. And again, he discovered almost 3,000 species that he found uses for, okay? And the more common one, look at here, common yarrow, 355 medicinal uses that the indigenous people used them for. Just to show you, here in the United States, the native people already learned that common yarrow was a very interesting plant to use for medicine. How much of it was true and how much is different? Well, that depends on who you want to talk to. But he recorded the different uses of the plants, and yarrow comes right up at the top. So these are medicinal plants. So going back to, again, Paracelsus, which you've already quoted once with the Doctrine of Signatures, dosa sola facit venenum, or it's the dose alone that makes the poison. And you guys know this. If you take too much of any kind of drug, it can affect you. And in fact, it can kill you. So this goes right back to what we're saying. If you think that you can just take a plant and just, oh, I read that it's medicinal, and then find a way to use it without having studied all the things that go with it, you're making a big mistake, okay? And then you also have to look that different plants can change, can be either edible or medicinal or poisonous, depending on what time of their life cycle you find them at. So for example, over here, here's pokeberry. And before it turns a nice purple color all on the leaves, poke salad is a popular dish down in the South. But if you were to collect it at the wrong time, guess what? It can lead you to a quick run to the hospital to get your stomach pumped, because this, again, depending on how you prepare it and when you prepare it, is either an edible plant or it could be a poisonous plant. Same with this. Okay, so right over here we have mayapple. It's very, very popular. There's lots of neat things about it I'm going to talk about. But what I am going to say is that it does grow, quote unquote, what's sometimes called a lemon berry, but the mayapple that grows out of this flower, if you eat it at just the right time, it's actually kind of citrusy. Okay, it's actually a kind of a neat little plant. Sometimes called a lemonade berry. But this is the thing though. Some tribes actually used to commit ritual suicide by eating mayapples. So this is not one that you experiment. Oh, I heard it's edible, and then you try to eat it at the wrong time. Folks, this is one that you would have to be very careful if you ever wanted to try to eat this kind of thing. So again, it just goes to show you, if you're not really sure about the plant or anything like that, you really shouldn't try it. And I'm just letting you guys know that. As somebody mentioned, herbalists and shamans and things like that have to practice and study a long time for this to actually work for them. Okay. Anyways, I think there were a couple of questions.
Can you say which plant this was?
Okay, so the one with the white flowers, this is mayapple. Okay.
Oh, sorry, the one on the left.
Oh, this is pokeberry. This is
thanks.
pokeberry. Yeah, this is pokeberry, which is what they make poke salad out of. Oh, and I'm already going on to the next one. So here's an interesting one. Watch this. So this is milkweed. Now, is milkweed poisonous? You guys have grown up your whole time probably hearing, hey, monarchs eat this, and by eating the latex out of this, they get cardioglycosides out of it that makes them distasteful and poisonous. Why? Because the poison affects animals' hearts, right? So again, milkweed is poisonous, right? Then why is this fool eating it? I mean, here you got something, folks, but guess what? You can eat this. When the leaves first come up, and on common milkweed, it actually tastes, it's kind of sweet. It's actually a really neat type of thing to eat, okay? So here is a plant that at the wrong time it is poisonous, can affect your heart, and at other times is edible. So folks, whenever you're looking at any kinds of things about looking at edibility or medicines or something like that, just remember, you have to be very sure about what you're doing, okay, folks? Otherwise, that can lead to some different trouble, okay? So again, this is of course milkweed. And a thing I told you guys, I did a whole presentation as part of a milkweed thing for Loudon on monarchs. And again, here's just some of the things about it. Milkweed ethnobotany. It's amazing. I mean, milkweeds have been used for medicine. In fact, the medicine part I'll talk about right here. This is Asclepius, which is what the genus for milkweed, Asclepius, is named after. He was the son of Apollo, and he was the god of medicine and healing, okay? And in fact, his symbol, the caduceus, is still the medical symbol over here. So folks, this was a berry, milkweeds have long been considered a very medicinal plant. In fact, butterfly weed, sometimes called pleurisy root, has got a ton of different kinds of medicinal uses to it. But it's also been used as food, as already mentioned. Cordage, wonderful for tying and so forth. Paper making, as a dye. They use it for hypoallergenic filling for different kinds of mattresses. Sweeteners, the latex. People actually tried to start a company using natural rubber made from it. So much neat things about it. So folks, one of my favorite little things have to do with the fluff that comes from. Okay, and here, during World War II, when we could no longer collect some of the kapok, which was used for filling life jackets and so forth, they started filling them with the actual fiber from milkweeds. And here there is an old saying: 2 bags saves 1 life. And actually, kids and people will go out there and collect the milkweed little fluff of them, because they could be used to make these Mae West, these life preservers, which of course was pretty popular. So folks, this has been used all sorts of different times, and I wonder how many pilots may have actually gotten their life saved because they were wearing a Mae West jacket filled with the fluff from milkweeds. All right, if there are any questions, I answer them now before I continue on to the next thing.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
From Steve Lonker, has anyone studied the placebo effect connected with shamanistic use of herbal remedies?
Yes, and I'm not going to go into, there's lots of studies that have gone into the placebo effect. The whole idea that if you think something's going to work for you, it might. And people still do that kind of thing. There's lots of different studies, some tilting one way or another. You'll have to do your own research on it. But yes, that the placebo effect is something that even non-medicinal plants that are used as medicines can sometimes help with. I mean, you think that's going to help you, and so it does.
Karen would like to know, haven't a number of people gotten ill or died in the discovery of food and medicine?
Yes, and I've always asked that same question. Who is the first person that decided, hey, I can eat this? And how many times did they have to eat it to know that it really was edible? And how many people failed in doing so? There's lots of different theories about them. I'm not going to go into it, how people discover these kinds of things, okay? Again, there are different kinds of ways that people discover them. I'm not going to go into it, but yes, I'm sure that some people that thought that they could, that thought they were eating something that was, edible, have made their mistake, and it's happened. And people do it to this day, okay? And again, we'll cover this when we go to foraging. The number one rule of foraging is you have to know for a fact that what you have is the plant that you think it is. People make mistakes with the plants all the time, and some of that leads to, going to the hospital and things like that. Absolutely.
And Deborah, I would like to know, is there a way to see the milkweed presentation?
I don't think they taped it. I'll have to do that another time. But I did it. It was a neat thing having to do with Loudon. They asked me to do this. It was a wonderful presentation. And again, I once thought, could I really do a whole presentation on one plant? And guess what? It happened. So yes, you can do it. I'll have to give it some other time, folks. But yes, it's not. It's, as far as I know, nobody taped it. Oh, actually, they may have taped it. I'm not sure, but the Loudon Conservancy was the people I did it for. If anyone has a copy of it, it would have been them. So I don't know if it was or not, to be honest with you.
That is all for questions right now.
Great. Well, let's continue on. So here's an interesting little plant that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. Jimson weed, and the tourist, some of which called sacred datura or whatever. This is a plant which has a lot of interesting stories to him. First of all, I'll give you of how it came up with the name Jimson weed. So the story goes that way before the American Revolution, there actually was a Bacon's Rebellion, okay? Nate Bacon was actually a landowner who refused to pay taxes, this, that, and whatever, and they sent the British soldiers to go put down the rebellion that he had started, okay? Well, under the original, one of the things, of course, that the American Revolution also started was these unfair laws that were passed, and one of them had to be that if a soldier needed a place to stay and things like that, they could use your place. And so, in one of these places, in fact, in Jamestown, some of these soldiers were billeted there, were actually sleeping there, and they got hungry, and most of the town, who didn't want to give their food away for free to the soldiers, they hid all their food. But a few of the British soldiers found these neat looking little pods, and either somebody told them or whatever, they thought they could be edible. So they ate these. And if you know anything about Jimson weed, is that it's got some powerful hallucinogenic properties to it. Very bad. To the point that there's some neat little stories saying that a couple of these guys were stripped naked and were running around. One guy was hanging upside down, with just, a lot of slather coming out down his throat. It was just all sorts of different kinds of things that had happened. And so they they called it then Jamestown weed, that later on became Jimson weed. And again, this is a powerful hallucinogenic. The seeds themselves are what's normally used. And it worries me too. I remember when I worked at Riverbend Park many years ago, I had a kid, it was a couple of teenagers come to me and said, "Hey, do you have the tourist Ramonium growing here?" So the only scientific name that he knows, and what's it for? To get a hallucinogenic drug, which can be incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous because it can kill you, okay? Now, there are other, people still use it. Some people, they use it for mouth sores and whatever, but this is a dangerous drug to try to use. Now, it's got some deep, important significance to the Virginia culture, the Virginia indigenous culture here, because this was used in a very important rite of passage, okay? And again, you got to remember that most of what we know about the Native people is mostly military records. Oh, how many bowmen did this town have, whatever. The indigenous folks and Native Americans were very careful about not sharing a lot of the other things with the colonists. And so there is an interesting story. It's called what became known as the Black Boy Death, and that's what the colonists thought it was. And they said that supposedly all the young indigenous folks at a certain age will go through this ritual, eat a bunch of different stuff, including datura, and that then they would have to starve themselves and do this for a whole week, and that's how they rite of passage. Now, of course, if supposedly the Black Boy Death, meaning that you die doing it, that's not a way to keep a culture going. So that's not really what happened. But they think that what may have happened is when you took this kind of stuff, you went on what some people call a vision quest, whatever you want to, these hallucinogenic types of things, and you died as a child, and you became an adult member of the tribe. And that may have been where the miscommunication came from. But this was a very important, in fact, the most important rite of passage for young Native American Indians here in Virginia. At least all the people who spoke Algonquian, I should say, only in that culture type. Okay. So anyway, neat little type of thing. Now I'm going to go to two more because there's an interesting story here. There are tons of mints, and again, mints can be. You can enjoy them as a tea, whatever, but some of them are used medicinally. And again, you've got different kinds. For example, mountain mints up here in the corner and right here in the middle. There are some invasive ones you can eat as well. The monardas, red monarda and pink monarda, all of these things you can make interesting teas from. So most of the mints are in some way both medicinal or just a neat tea that you can make. So again, not everything that's a medicine can be a medicine. Some of it can just be enjoyable teas, but can be used for medicinal purposes as well. And then one last thing, and then I'll stop and I'll ask some more questions without getting too bogged down. And that is, I want to tell you a little bit about Mithridates Eupator, okay? Mithridates Eupator was the king of Pontus, which was part of Turkey a long time ago, who had made some very interesting enemies. In this case, he had made some enemies with the Romans, okay? And this guy was paranoid of a couple of things. For one, he was so convinced that he was going to be poisoned that he developed an interesting term now called Mithridatism. That's the acquired tolerance to poison. He would actually eat all the known poisons a little bit of time so he could build up a huge tolerance to whatever it was, okay? And that is something that, people still sometimes believe in. You can take something, and yes, if you take enough of it, you can acquire tolerance to what it used to be. And again, this guy wasn't a nice guy. He ended up killing some of his own members of his family and things like that. But again, he was convinced that someone was going to poison them. He also came up with an interesting little antidote. He basically, some of it, again, most of these records are lost, but they do think that it included things like ducks that had been fed on poisonous plants, things like charcoal, these kinds of things. And he ate this, and he said that this was an antidote to any kind of poison alive. At least he thought that. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because at one point, the Romans did catch up with him. And so the story goes, when they tried to capture him, he knew that the Romans were going to give him a very slow and painful death. So Mithridates Eupator decided to poison himself unsuccessfully. And even though he had built such a tolerance to poison that he was unable to kill himself by poisoning himself. And by the way, Eupatorium is, and now it was at one time a whole plant genus that had a lot of what they thought were medicinal properties to them. And I go one more and just to show you some of these. So Joe Pye, for example, used to be a Eupatorium. And I used to love to do this way back when, before they changed all the names of these things, and Eutrochium, Eupatoriums, and Agerinas. But this, for example, Joe Pye, the name Joe Pye supposedly had to do up in the Northeast with an Indian shaman who supposedly found all sorts of neat cures for things. And they said that supposedly people followed him to find out what his secret was, and they saw that one of the things that he would put in there was Joe Pye weed. And again, I used to like to say that kind of story, but again, now they changed the name now to Eupatorium. But Bone said that's still a Eupatorium, and again, this was used for broke-bane fever. This was used for a lot of different kinds of fevers as far as changing them. Now, white snake root's kind of interesting. Again, it's changed its name a couple of times. This was actually something that can be poisonous. Just to show you again, sometimes the dose alone makes the poison. In this case, they believe that Abraham Lincoln's mother died because the cows that had been feeding on it had poisoned milk, And when she drank the milk, she had died from it. So again, the dose alone can make the poison, and this is a good example of that. So a couple of quick questions before I don't want to take too long because I know I'm going to be running out of time soon. But any questions?
Yes, one from Alex. He would like to know about the edibility of mountain mint.
It is. Now, again, you can make teas out of it. Okay, so basically dry it and make a tea out of it. Now, here's the thing. It is a minty type of thing, and many of these mints, you gotta get used to them, okay? But yes, from almost all the mountain mints, whether it's hoary mountain mint or whether it's what's the other one? The one with the thin leaves. Now I forget the name of it. But all of those mountain mints you can drink as a tea. Some people would say maybe a medicinal tea, but again, it's dried and made into a tea. But again, different people, some people find it very good drinking, and some people don't. It's just one of those things.
How can you tell boneset from snake root?
Okay, so if you know boneset, supposedly one of the big things about it, it's perfoliate, like I mentioned with the uvularia, with the bellwort. The stem goes right through the middle of the plant. So if you have a plant and the stem, by the way, there's more than one kind of boneset. This is common boneset. So right through the middle of the leaves themselves, that's where the stem comes from. Thus, that is boneset. Okay, but white snake root is different. This does not. It's got the leaves are on their own little branches, so they're not at all. They're very different in the way that they look.
Anna would like to know who decides about the plant name changes and when.
Well, that's something that they're deciding more and more. And again, with this case, if I'm not mistaken, they started noticing differences. They assumed that all these plants were in one family, and then they noticed differences. So I think one of the big differences is that Eupatorium, basically, they're opposite leaved, okay? And that's one of the things that makes Eupatorium still Eupatorium. Whereas in Joe Pye's, it's a whirl of leaves. It's a circle of leaves. And that's one big difference between the two, that they said, okay, all the ones that have this perfoliatum, okay, Eupatorium, those are the ones that only have 2 leaves to them. But they've done genetics. There's all sorts of different reasons that people decide that these plants have changed and so forth. And again, sometimes there's lumpers and there's splitters. Some people lump them together into one big family. Some people split them. In this case, these were split into multiple families. All right, continuing on. So again, one other thing that I wanted to mention as far as medicinal, all different tribes use them, is actually willow, okay? And this is the big thing about willow. Aspirin today is made out of something, salicylic acid, which is very closely related to this. And so when people made all sorts of different kinds of basically all sorts of different kinds of medicines from this, they're basically taking aspirin. And by the way, most people may have heard of this big thing. Hey, the viceroy, which is what this butterfly is, with the little marks in between the leaves, right between the wings, right here. They may have heard, oh, this is actually a mimic of the monarch. The monarch is poisonous because, as I mentioned, it's feeding on the cardioglycosides of milkweed, and this is not. That's not true at all. This actually doesn't taste very good either because he's eating salicylic acid, so willow. And so guess what? This particular butterfly itself does not taste good. So it's not so much that one is copying the other, that both get protection by looking the same, because both of them taste bad. All right. And again, salix is the family for willows, and I guess has to do with the salicylic acid, which is one normally found in them. So let me tell you an interesting story with this one. So most people know, of course, my family's from Peru. My wife's family is actually, she was born in Honduras, but she was raised in El Salvador. And I remember one day, my wife came out, found this plant outside in the area. And at the time, I noticed the flower on it, okay, this little flower. Goes, look at this, wow, we eat this all the time. It's Mora, we eat Mora all the time. And I'm like, well, whoa. I looked at the flower type and I said, well, first of all, that is in the same family as some of the nightshades, some of the deadly types of poisons, okay? And I said, no, some of these things can kill you, okay? That's one of the big things about nightshade. So wouldn't you know, a couple of days later, I'm eating something, and she goes, so how do you like it? And I was drinking this little soup, and I'm like, oh, it tastes good. And she goes, what's in it? That's what I asked her. She goes, well, it's Mora. Now, in Peru, Mora means mulberry. And I'm like, this doesn't taste like mulberry at all. And I remembered what she had called mulberry. And I was like, No way. You fed me the plant that I told you could be a deadly nightshade. It could kill me. So right away, I was looking through to try to find it and so forth. And I found out that this plant is actually very edible, okay? Now I purposely plant this every year. We eat the leaves, we eat the fruits and so forth. It's very edible. But it's probably been confused with another plant, and thus that is deadly, and so it's got a bad reputation. So yes, it's a nightshade. It is in that family. This is an incredibly edible nightshade. And again, folks, you have to know really carefully about the plant, or maybe have some dumb luck. And in this case, I got lucky and it wasn't a poisonous plant. But once you do get to know the plant, that's one of the big things about any kind of thing. You have to know exactly what the plant is before you try it. Or in this case, you get tricked into trying it. Okay. So I don't know if I'd already stopped for questions. I'll continue on a little bit longer if I have. So again, flowering dogwood, many people know our state tree, state flower. Again, when there wasn't, especially during the Civil War, when there wasn't a good supply for quinine, this was used supposedly as a substitute for it. Just another example of people trying to make do by using other plants when they couldn't get the thing that you normally would go for. So now we'll talk about some of the things that people have eaten before, okay? And again, most of these things, it's not just edible, but there's other properties to them. Again, here's a lot of these. These are the ones that have the most uses, okay? By the way, common chokecherry, that is not found here, okay? Not here in the DC area. We have black cherry, which is very similar, but common chokecherry is much more common in mountains and further on, but it was one that was used the most. But you can eat black cherry just as well as much. I do it every year. So foraging, and again, the first rule about foraging, you gotta make sure you have a positive ID. If you don't touch it, okay? That's the big important lesson with any kind of foraging. Other types of things, you gotta make sure that nothing is rare. You don't wanna collect anything like that, of course. And you never wanna over collect things because that destroys it. There's a big rule that at least 10% of any one population, but I'll tell you, this is how accidents happen. I take 10%. And somebody else, Saranella comes along, she takes 10%, and somebody else takes 10%. And soon you wipe out a population because even though the general is 10%, if everyone's taking 10%, you run out of plants pretty quickly. Most of the time they ask you if you are foraging for stuff, can you let it reproduce, make it seeds and berries before you collect it, to at least keep the thing going on? And then if you can, take one that wouldn't have survived, when it's crowded out, one that would have been trampled, whatever. Take that one first because it wouldn't have survived anyways. That's a good way to try to do it. Again, be careful where you collect, because you don't want to collect any places where people have been spraying, of course. And again, if you're collecting near water, be careful because the water may be what's contaminated, and of course it goes up into the plant. If you're collecting bark, and that's the case in not so much as an edible plant, but more as a medicinal plant, then you do try to take it into, you don't want to take it in an area so you girdle the tree itself or whatever. And of course, you need to get permission, okay? The good thing is that many of these plants are actually weeds and whatever, and those are easily eaten, okay? And again, a common motto for that I've heard before for foragers says, don't collect the first plant you come to, it's for the animals. Don't collect the second plant, it's so the plant can reproduce. Don't pick the third plant, it's for the next forager. Take only what you need from the fourth one. And this is a neat type of plants. How many guys knew that spring beauties were edible, all right? If you were to dig down the bottom of the spring beauty, you come up with a fairy spud. And again, this was something that many Native Americans would use early in the springtime, right when things are bad, right when March or so, these things are blooming. This was one of the first easy to find food sources because it's got a big white flower telling you here it is. And again, you can eat the thing. But remember, this is its root, okay? So if you eat the fairy spud, you do kill the plant. And again, that's one of those things. But again, this was an edible plant and people have eaten it for long times, and it tastes just like little tiny potatoes, which is kind of a cool thing. Any questions before I continue on?
Sure. Alex would like to know, are eupatoriums supposed to be poisonous or medicinal? Why did they name it after him?
So it's supposed to be medicinal, but again, it's a big family, okay? But eupatoriums originally they thought was what Joe Pye, for example, what he used as his secret ingredient for medicine. But some of them are very poisonous. So again, just basing it on one family, in this case, one that's broken down into multiple families, is a bad idea because different members of the family can be poisonous and other ones can be edible. Same thing can be said about, remember I talked to you about the solanum and the nightshades? Some plants in the nightshade family are edible, okay? Tomatoes, whatever, potatoes, and other ones like deadly nightshade can kill you. So folks, you can't just say, oh, it's in this genus, it's in this family, it must be edible because the other one is. No, you got to know exactly what the plants are, or you could make a bad mistake. That is just kind of the way it is. Always make positive ID as to what you're going to eat. Okay.
Claire reminds us that, yes, follow these rules for our native plants, but when dealing with invasives, take all you want, especially for garlic mustard.
Exactly, and I'm about to get to that point, and just let me see, maybe it's the next slide, I can't remember. Yes, invasive weeds and plants. If you want to eat some, take all you want. Take all you want of the autumn olive, which is a great thing, makes great, you can make some great little foods from these kinds of things as well. First year plants, if you're getting the garlic mustard, first year plants, when it hasn't built up a lot of the pepperiness on it is much more edible. And heck, wineberries, I love wineberries, but you know, it does spread not just by the berries, it actually roots over, and every time a branch touches the root, it forms another plant. So just eating the berries won't control wineberries. And Himalayan blackberry, you know, every year my wife, first of all, my wife, at first my daughter and my son, and now my granddaughters, we all go collecting Himalayan blackberry. And you know what? I don't think I'm hurting anything because it's an invasive plant. Yes, I'm taking some away from the birds, but that's so he doesn't go and poop it out and start a new plant somewhere else. So I feel no guilt whatsoever eating invasive plants. And if you got to eat something, that's what you guys can go for. A lot of invasives are good eating. Now, there are other things which are considered good eating. Most people have probably realized that many of the acorns were used by different kinds of tribes to make all sorts of different kinds of meal and so forth. Now, I will say though, of the probably 42 different kinds of oaks that we have here in Virginia, and those are without any crossbreeding between some of the ones which they can cross-pollinate, but they become a brand new species, even not true species, but hybrids. But the only one that you can eat directly off the tree, in my experience, is live oak. Okay, live oak, which is really more of a southern type of tree. I've eaten it in Virginia, but way down south, is great. You can eat this right off the tree, which you can't do with any other ones. The other ones you have to wash, you have to change the water umpteen times, or it's not edible. This you can take it straight off the tree. I remember I went to visit. I was down in New Orleans again, where I won that award for my Capital Naturalist thing. And when I was down there, there of course have live oaks all over New Orleans. I was eating these off the places, and of course a lot of people were wondering, why is this guy eating these things or whatever? Because hey, I knew were edible, and I wasn't going to pass up this free little meal, especially since it's so rare up here. Okay, now black walnuts, again, you can make a dye out of this, of course, but you can also eat them, and black walnuts have eaten a lot of that. These are a bunch of different kinds of hickory nuts. Some like the pig nut are, with the little snout on them. Yes, guess what? That is really more fit for pigs than people. Or bitter nuts, well, it's a little bit bitter. That's not something you want to eat. Mocker nuts, a big seed, but it mocks you because there's almost nothing inside of them. But pecans are hickory nuts, and so are shellbark hickories, and all of these are good eating plants. But if you're going to eat them, and that includes, of course, hazelnuts, which are great little plants, even though most trees don't produce a lot of nuts. But you want to do a test before you eat them, and this is called the float test, and it works for pretty much most types of nuts. Okay, if you put it in the water and leave it for a second, if it floats, don't eat it. It's either got things have eaten the insides and it's rotted away, so there's air bubbles, whatever. There's insects, and so it floats. But if it sinks to the bottom, then that means that one is edible. Not only that, but also we do this with every time we plant different kinds of nut trees. We do this. We throw away the ones that float, but we don't waste our time on them. But the ones that sink, we know we can plant those, and they're more likely to germinate because there's nothing wrong with the seed itself. So anyways, a quick thing on nuts, for example. If there aren't any questions, I'll continue on. So I can keep.
Yeah, there is one question from Rob. What about mushroom foraging?
Okay. I purposely took the mushrooms out of this, and Serenella can tell you a lot more about mushrooms than I can. But okay, I will say that for the first, I've been doing this, doing all sorts of these kinds of things forever, and I'm, I consider an outdoorsman. I used to hunt, fish, and forage. But the thing I never foraged for was mushrooms. And then I got a little bit more, oh yeah, you know what, morels are easy to, chicken of the woods is easy to use, lion's mane. So then I started learning more of them. But you know what? That it's not a plant, okay? And so I'm not talking about ethnobotany because it's really not a plant to be talking about. But the other thing is, if you ever try to do this, I would not start with mushrooms. That is not a way that you want to learn how to do any of these kinds of things. So I don't talk about mushrooms in these kinds of presentations.
I will add to that I am the mycologist of residence for Audubon Naturalist Society, so I'll be happy to answer your questions via email to be mindful of the time with Alonso today.
Sure.
And we also have the program chair for the Mycological Association of Washington, D.C. with us tonight, which is another great resources for mushroom foraging.
Lots of good stuff out there, folks. Lots of good stuff to learn about.
Yeah. Alex would like to know, how do you digest the acorn tannins? Did you process them?
No. That for live oaks, the other ones, no, I've tried doing it. I'm not going to dip it in the water and run through it to 20 different times. Not doing that. So live oak, because I can just eat the live oak and it does not have a lot of tannins. As far as I know, that's the only local, more or less local oak that you can eat straight off the trees. I don't bother with the other ones. It's too much work. Right? All right.
That's all for now.
Yeah, and so here are wild strawberries, and I think I love wild strawberries, and they can grow in the worst place. This is my driveway, growing out of the rocks, and here's wild strawberries that I can eat. And of course, this is my son. He would hate to know that I put this picture on there, but this is the thing, though. I mean, just because you like to eat them, don't forget that many other animals do too. Most of the plants that I'm talking about, more than anything, are native plants, and they have a lot of close ties. So I would often plant these edible landscaping type of things, because guess what? They support wildlife as well, and I like that. Now, you can get wild strawberry, but it's easy to mix them up with other types of things. The big thing is, if it's got yellow flowers or the seeds stick on top of the actual fruit, then it's not wild strawberry, okay? It's one of the mock or barren-bound strawberries, whatever the case may be. They're not really edible. They're not poisonous, but they're not all that tasty either. If it's got white flowers, and if the seeds it's embedded into the skin, then it's wild strawberry, and it's very good eating. I love them. They're tiny, but I love those different kinds of things. Now, passion fruit. And again, passion fruits, we have two of them here. One of them is edible, the purple passion fruit. Mine is in bloom right now in my yard, and I love the beautiful flowers on them, the big fruits. And again, this is something my wife made already. I love passion fruit. And you guys may have had it before when you're traveled or something, but it does have some medicinal properties to it. It's considered a sedative tea. It's a great thing to taste right before you're going to sleep. But when you mix it with other things, in this case in Illinois bundleflower, which is not found around here, you can actually make a hallucinogenic drink that people used to use, again, much like the famous Peruvian shamanistic drink, ayahuasca. It's a neat little thing that people would take to take some of these vision quests or whatever. And again, that is something that this plant was used for, even though, yes, it's edible, but there are other properties to it. And again, some people say that if you eat it, it helps you to lose weight. So some neat things about maypops or passion flowers, one of my favorite all-around plants, and something I've got growing in two places in my yard for sure. And then edible landscaping, you can't get much more edible landscaping than shadbush, okay, service berries, June berries, whatever you want to. Beautiful flowers, tons of different kinds of animals eat it. And here, this is in my little tree up front, collect a ton of these different kinds of somewhat blueberry tasting types of fruit. So a great all-around type of plant, very much available locally. You can find lots of different examples of this that you can plant for. But I will say some of them, if you have in particular cedars nearby, they do have cedar rust, and that does give you mummy berries. It makes the berries very untasty and so forth, and that happens. Some years are worse than others. Depends on how bad the blight is, how many the fungi are on the plants themselves. And again, common persimmon, absolutely great. People love to eat it. All this thing, you have to wait until the frost hits it. Not true at all. If you were to take the fruit and you barely touch it, and it comes right off the stem with no, it comes right off the tree with no stem or anything on it, then it's perfectly edible and a wonderful type of plant. But it's also was medicinal. I mean, people used to use it as Cherokee used to use it for antidiarrheal type of thing, for sore mouths, toothaches, all sorts of different kinds of things. So here is an edible plant that also found other types of uses by people. All right, I'll go just one more. Here's my son, much older now, and here we are, pawpaws. And I will say, people who have planted pawpaws, it's a fantastic plant. The largest North American fruit that we have. They can get nice and big, wonderful tasting. Usually get them the end of August to the very end of August, beginning of September. If you can beat the animals to it, they're great. Okay, the sole host plant for the zebra swallowtail, and again, a neat little type of fruit. You can make bread out of it, but you do need if you plant it, make sure you plant 2 different plants, okay, from different parentages. You can have a whole grove of these things, but they won't produce any fruit if they all came from the same plant. Okay, so if you're going to plant them to get edible fruit out of them, put 2 different trees in there that didn't come from the same family. And again, you used to use the bark for cordage, so a neat little type of thing. And I love edible flowers again. And again, here we are with all the different kinds of things. I love not so much you don't eat the flower here, just lick the juice off of the tulip tree. Black locust, red bud, daylilies. You could eat, and of course you eat the pears off of our native cactus. Whoops! But in reality, you can also eat the flowers. I usually wait until mine are at the end of the day, because the flowers only last one day. So at the end of the day, I eat the flowers because the flower's gone anyways. And of course, people used to eat the violets. They used to use them in candy types of flowers and all this kind of stuff. Now, one last thing I was going to say about edible plants, I haven't covered any of them, but if I had to pick one author that talks about edible plants, this is the guy. Samuel Thayer is the best forager around these days, in my opinion. Okay, he's got books, and in most books, you'd have some kind of disclaimer in front saying, hey, a disclaimer, I can tell you that these things are edible, but don't take my word for it, don't eat them or whatever, okay? He says, no, that's BS. Now it goes, look, in him, he doesn't have a disclaimer, he has a claimer, okay? He says, look, I have tried all these plants 100 times, and if you can't stand behind your thing saying, look, I'm not telling you don't eat them, this is something that's edible, he says you shouldn't write the book. And so every plant in there, he's eaten 100 different times, the best foraging thing out there. This is the best foraging book out there. Now, a couple of quick questions and I'm almost done.
Right now, just a couple of thank yous in the chat.
Okay, good deal. And so again, the last couple of things are just tools, and they can be dyes, whatever. Here are some of the more popular ones. Again, I think that you'll be able to share some of this so you can read into some of the charts later on. The top 10 fiber plants, the top 10 dye plants on here. And again, some of these things are really good. This is called Indian hemp dogbane, and it's wonderful. It's the strongest of the natural cordages that we have here in Virginia and in Maryland. But it's been used for other things. The Chinese used it for treating depression and things like that. Called dogbane because some people thought you could bathe your dog in it. It would be really good for getting fleas and stuff like that off your dog. Eye medicine, all sorts of different kinds of things from this very cool plant that was mostly used for making rope, cordage, but other people use it for other things as well. Multiple uses for most of the plants. Same thing with this. Common mullein, which is not native, but was brought over a long, long time ago. And it's called lots of different, including Quaker Rouge or whatever. It's actually very felty type of look to it. And again, Quaker Rouge, because people used to rub it on their face, and you weren't using makeup, but it'd give you a little blush to it. People would wrap their feet in this. Again, the Confederates, by partway through the Army, they didn't have any shoes, so they used a lot of this for packing what little things they had in there. So again, a very useful type of plant that was used for these different things. You can make a dye out of this plant, the yellow dye, tons of different things. You could, they'd smoke this thing, believe it or not, and the smoking was supposedly for sore throats and whatever. So again, multiple uses for this one little plant, but most of the time it was used for other things too. You could dip these big things, and in Europe and in Asia, they dip these into the ground, into tallow, and you can make torches, very serviceable torches out of them. And then bloodroot. Again, the flowers are great, But if you do break it apart, you do have this big blood part to it. And this, they think, could have been one reason, for example, that many of the native people may have had a red hue to them. Some people say, hey, the term redskin may actually have come from the use of this particular plants in certain tribes, because they would paint themselves with this, their whole body. Now, this, for some people, can give you a nasty reaction, okay? But they would put them all over their body for a very good reason, and that is they think that this also, much like you spray some DEET or some kind of poison on yourself to make sure that the animals can't get to you, if you covered yourself and painted yourself with this, now whatever insects, whatever, had to go through this and poison themselves getting to you, okay? So they had another good use for this kind of plant. This is bloodroot, and a very common plant in the springtime around here. And again, folks, that's it for my presentation. I do invite you to check this out. And I know I'm going over time, but I'll be around for a little bit. So if you do have some questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But but for those people who need to go, I can understand completely. You know, I hope that I will bump into you guys sometime soon when we are not just virtually doing this stuff, and I can be in the field with you guys, which I really appreciate. So thank you guys very much. So for those people who need to go, you can go now. Otherwise, I'll be happy to answer whatever questions you may have. The few people are still left with us.
So I just wanted to remind folks that while we are here, we have an amazing talk by Melanie coming on tomorrow. And then next week, we are going to be talking about culture and birding and backyard wildlife. So please feel free to visit our website, anshome.org/naturalist-hour for more information. And if you'd like to verbally ask some questions of Alonso, please do so. Otherwise, I'll be looking at the chat.
All right, guys. So if you have a question, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, thank you guys very much for letting me talk for a little while, because now I'm, you know, as most people know, I'm a paper pusher now. I'm stuck in an office, and I look for opportunities to do this kind of stuff.
Alonso, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Well, this is Lisa Garrett.
Oh, hey, Lisa. How you doing?
All right. I had to tell you that I heard recently that in order to be a good pawpaw farmer, that down in Kentucky, they hang roadkill from the trees to attract flies to pollinate the pawpaws, because what you just said, you have to have pawpaws from different populations.
You have different populations. That was part of it. So you need two different parent plants to get fruit. But more so than that, the flower, as you notice, is not a very pretty flower. It's not built for attracting bees or whatever. It's built for attracting things like flies and some carrion flies and things like that. Carrion beetles, I should say. So you can get much better production if you hang these rancid pieces of meat, because you attract the flies and the carrion beetles that then also visit your flowers, and thus you can get a more bang for your buck, as it were. So
my question is, have you ever seen that or seen pictures of that?
No. Again, we're very lucky in that most of the stuff that we have good, the places where you can get good pawpaws. I've never seen it done. And again, I don't know very many people who raise pawpaws. When I find pawpaws, it's in the woods. So I don't know of any groves of people who are purposely raising them for that reason.
Okay. I just imagine that was quite a wild sight to see, like dead squirrels hanging in a tree.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alex
has raised her hand, please.
This is Alex. Yes. Hi. So for your foraging, I just attended a talk today about trespassing on property and public use. How do you approach this when you see a plant that you want to forage? Like when you see your fourth iteration of the plant and you're ready to actually take it, how do you feel good about it ethically?
First of all, you got to get permission. I mean, there's lots of ways to get permission, and there's also public places you can do this. So for example, I hate to say this, but in parks, you have to get permission, and guess what? The parks aren't usually going to say, hey, you're welcome to come in and do it. Even if it's an invasive plant, If you're not part of their program, they usually won't tell you can go ahead and do it. So get permission no matter what. I'm lucky. I got lots of landowners. I go hunting all the time. I can collect things from there. But if not, in Virginia, and I don't know what the deal is in Maryland, but in Virginia, all the wildlife management areas, okay, those places that are bought and paid for by hunting dollars for hunting, are also, you can collect things from there. You can collect berries, you can collect all this kind of stuff. So you can collect there legally, even if you don't know who the person is, because they've already said you can collect these things in our areas. Okay, so that's, yeah, but you get permission otherwise.
Got it.
You know?
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? All right, well, folks, I want to thank you guys very much. I certainly enjoyed hanging out with you guys for a little while, and I hope that we can do this again sometime soon. Or even better, I hope to bump into you guys somewhere on a trail, and then we can really enjoy whatever nature provides out there, whether it's a nice offering of a neat plant or animal that we can look at, or even better, we happen to find a good thing that we can actually forage for. That is, if we get permission, that is. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Take care. Bye-bye.